Good evening, and welcome to episode 82 of the Political Mike podcast. A midterm election like no other. The first national election after the January 6th insurrection on the Capitol and the undermining of the 2020 election results. The stakes couldn't be higher, as this midterm election will change the landscape of American politics for at least another 20 years. Tonight, Americans in key election battleground states will decide who will run the 2024 election vote in their states, choosing from a slate of candidates that include Republicans who back former President Donald Trump's false claim that he won in 2020. In 30 of the country's 50 states, so-called election deniers are candidates for at least one of the state's positions overseeing elections: governor, secretary of state, or attorney general, according to a nonprofit advocacy group, States United Action. The high stakes of this election in the United States comes just days after Brazil, a 34-year-old democracy, held its own election in a high-stakes environment in which Da Silva, a former two-term president, received 50.9% of the vote compared to 49.1% for Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro, age 67, a populist in the mold of former U.S. President Donald Trump, served as an army captain during Brazil's military dictatorship that lasted from 1964 to 1985, and he repeatedly challenged the legitimacy of the election and the reliability of Brazil's electronic voting machines, and hinted that he might not accept the results if he lost. Tonight's midterm elections also take place just days after Israel's fifth parliamentary election in 4 years, in which long-serving Israel leader Benjamin Netanyahu is returning to the post of prime minister for the third time, as he is positioned to form a far-right governing coalition after his conservative bloc won a majority in that week's national election. According to 538's final forecast, Republicans have an 84 in 100 chance of taking control of the House of Representatives, and Democrats just a 16 out of 100 chance of retaining control of the House. When we're looking at the Senate, 538 also gives Republicans a 59 out of 100 chance of taking back the Senate, while Democrats are given a 41 in 100 chance of keeping the Senate. Here to help me make sense of this high stakes and very historic election are a group of distinguished scholars who are no guests to the Political Mic. I've had them all. They don't need an introduction, but for the sake of it, I'll give a brief one. We've got Dr. Deborah Blaine coming on tonight. She has practiced medicine for over 30 years and watched the changes that have turned patients into customers and medicine into an industry whose sole objective is profit. It inspired her to write her first book, Code Blue, The Other End of the Stethoscope, because she wanted to share the challenges doctors face when trying to provide good standard of care treatment to patients. She said that our hands are tied at so many turns by insurance companies, the pharmaceutical industry, and the massive corporations that have swallowed up medical practices. We're going to be joined by Dr. Blaine shortly tonight. We also have Professor Fred Cook, who represents a wide range of clients in the areas of government relations, municipal law, and corporate and land use matters. Since 1986, Professor Cook has served as an adjunct professor of law at Howard University School of Law. He's also a member of the Board of Governors of the D.C. Bar, and he's also a member of the D.C. Commission on Judicial Disabilities and Tenure. We also have Zach Tolan, who is a practicing attorney and recent graduate of Howard University School of Law. Miss Alazia Bukal will be with us tonight. She's a proud elementary educator, an equity fellow in the Baltimore City Public Schools District. She's also the CEO and founder of Forward Advising Center, where she provides academic assistance towards post-secondary attainment. And she's also an education and empowerment content creator. Nate Honore, a graduate of Quinnipiac University School of Law. Jerry Ford, who's a private equity and M&A associate at Sidley & Austin, LLP. He also, before law school, hosted a daily radio talk show on KJOZ 880 AM in Texas, and he has made numerous television appearances on Fox 26 News and KHOU 11 as a political commentator. Israel Abraham, a recent graduate of Howard Law and also an associate at a law firm in Chicago, and Tia Toombs, who is an Oakland University student who majored in pre-law. She is also the young advocate and leader in her community and served as the 28th Miss Oakland University. Such a panel. So without further ado, I want to just dive right in. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to open up the discussion by asking you, being that, the 538 numbers are what they are, Republicans apparently, according to these polling, are teed up to become, to take charge of the House. Now, keep in mind what's at stake here. The Republicans have promised that if they take the majority, if they win the majority in the House, they will end the January 6th committee. They would launch a myriad of investigations into President Biden and his son Hunter Biden. They would put a screeching halt to his legislative agenda, and they would impeach President Biden. If the Democrats keep their majority, they promise to make codifying Roe versus Wade their top legislative priority in the new session of Congress. And there's also hopes and optimism about finally getting something done from voting rights. So in your view, anyone can jump in. Who did a better job at addressing the issues most Americans are concerned about this election cycle? Was it the Democratic Party or the Republican Party?
I would probably say the Republican Party did a better job, as far as I can tell, on some issues. Can everyone hear me okay? Sorry, I've been having a little bit of sound issue. Okay. I would say mainly on the issues of crime and the economy. I would give the Republicans a bit of an edge, because you had the Democrats that was trying to push through more trillions of dollars of fiscal policy when we had record inflation of more than a century. And thankful to Senator Joe Manchin, who warded off the Democrats during that time, that didn't get passed, and it didn't exacerbate the issue, that the inflation issue. And on crime, I think you just seen the Democratic Party just come off as extremely weak on that particular crucial issue for voters. And I can get into the reasons for why, but I just want to I think those are the two issues that I think, and maybe the Republicans they've done a lot of things culturally, and I think they've done some things to poison the conversation, as well as Democrats. But as far as on those two issues that really, I think, inspire most voters, the Republicans will have it.
That's kind of interesting. Not the way I see it, but that's interesting. I think the issue of crime is a fabrication. It is a trope that the Republicans use again and again and again, and it's not borne out by the reality of what's on the ground. This is not a crime-ridden nation. There is more crime now than there was last year, maybe, and more crime than there was some other point in history. But this is not a particularly high level of crime in the United States of America. I've lived through much higher crime rates than exist now, and crime really still isn't a problem for most citizens. But the Republicans talk about crime as though criminals were standing outside your door waiting to break into your house and harm you and steal everything you have, which is not the reality that the overwhelming majority of Americans live in. They don't want to solve crime. What they want is to keep the American public afraid of crime. They have no solutions. What they talk about is fear. And the same thing on inflation. Inflation was not caused by the Democrats' so-called reinvestment program. Donald Trump's and the Republicans' tax cut is a much bigger cause of inflation in the United States. The defense of corporate America is a much bigger issue for inflation. 54% of the inflation that exists in this country today is a function of corporate profits, not inherently high prices. And inflation exists around the planet. It's not just in the United States. But I will agree with you that the Republicans have done a much better job of selling this fear, but not talking about any solutions. And if that makes a difference to people, then I guess they win. I think that people ought to be a bit more thoughtful and look at what is actually being done and vote that way, as opposed to let's throw these rascals out and bring in some rascals who have no solution whatsoever. In the history of the United States, the Democrats have done a much better job of managing the economy than the Republicans, except that's not the perception in the marketplace. It's insane.
I think it depends on who is actually on, what we're considering to be the most important issues to voters. Early exit polling from CNN has the economy at number 1 at around 32% and abortion at number 2 at about 27%. So on abortion, easily that's Democrats. Remember that they ran up the numbers very big in the summer over abortion. Democrats won special elections in upstate New York and in Alaska largely because of abortion. Now there has been a kind of distillation between abortion and the economy in the minds of many voters, and that's partially the fault of Democrats for not making it clear that these two issues are linked. You can't have economic freedom if you don't have freedom to make your own personal decisions. But the fact that Joe Biden is still underwater and has been for 10 years, and we're looking at an election that is effectively a coin flip either way, shows that Democrats haven't been as bad at storytelling as they have been in the past.
So I agree with Dr. Cook. I think that Republicans are very good at firing up their base with fear mongering. And Democrats this year, they are really good at, their message is we're going to fight for your freedoms. But the way that I see it is that both sides can't really seem to get across to swing voters right now. Something that I hear often from swing voters that are being polled is that both sides are so extreme and both sides are, really polarized right now. And I don't really think that either side have gotten across because their agendas are just so different. I really think that it could go either way at this point.
Yeah, Mike. The Democrats came into this election this year at a, just major disadvantage historically because of, the fact that this is a midterm election when, the Democrats are in power, and historically when the party that's in power after those first 2 years, that first midterm, they usually are taking a very, having a tough night doing that midterm. You saw that in '94, you saw that, during the Obama administration. I think the only outlier was George W. Bush in 2004 for, obvious reasons, considering, the war at the time. But, the fact that, like, Nathan said earlier, it's a coin flip. And the fact that this is a coin flip says how strong I think the Democrats has been, in their messaging right now, because, this is not supposed to be a coin flip. This is supposed to be a time where the Republicans make way, they take over, take back the House, maybe take back the Senate. But the fact that this is going to be a nail biter, right? There's a good possibility that the Democrats will keep the Senate. That shows that, the Democrats have done well with their messaging. When you're talking about the Roe v. Wade being overturned, when you look at, Joe Biden with the student loan forgiveness, he still didn't, pass some of his major landmark legislation that he was aiming for. But I think Democrats have done a great job at explaining kind of reasons why, right? Like, we're in power, like Democrats are in power, the House and the Senate, but there's a very small majority. And even if the Democrats tonight lose, in one of these two houses, is going to be a very slim margin anyway. So I think it's important, that we continue to talk about, some of the accomplishments of the, Biden administration and Democratic Party at this time. But I do kind of want to push back on this discussion about crime not being a major issue. I think we're going to see, especially in like the state of New York, you're going to see some Democratic lawmakers who are going to have a very tough time because of this crime issue. Now, that is not going to be the same story across the nation, right? So I don't think every city crime is going to be such a big deal. But you're seeing right now in the polling in New York with the governor situation where Joe Biden had to come down, I think a couple of days ago to campaign with the candidate. One of the reasons why the Republicans are doing well in that deep blue state is because of this issue of crime. So I think Democrats need to take a look at this and make sure that we are messaging up going forward and how to deal with this issue of crime moving forward.
I'd say in New York, actually,
what crime are you talking about? In the 10 states in the United States where the crime rate is the highest, 8 of those states are run by so-called Republicans. So where is the Republican agenda to address crime? The crime rate in New York City is lower now than it was when Rudy Giuliani was mayor of New York City.
I live in Chicago. There are people getting murdered day in and day out in Chicago. You have Ken Griffin, one of the manager of one of the largest hedge funds in the world, specifically cite Chicago Democratic ran city for its crime as his reason for leaving. So
this is an asshole who supports this is an asshole who supports Ron DeSantis. So don't cite him as an authority. I agree with you.
He runs one of the largest hedge funds in the world, and he cited crime in Chicago. So you may want to write him off for one decision, but that means something.
But the point I'm making is don't cite a wealthy person as an authority.
I cited a
No.
business owner of one of the
No,
largest
no, no,
hedge
no, no,
funds
no,
in
no,
the
no.
world.
You're not
He's
hearing.
incredible. The University of
You're not
Chicago
hearing.
named their economics department after this man, and everyone wants
That
to
just
write
means
off
he
people.
signed a fat
Like,
check. It doesn't necessarily
That
make him
mean
an
he
do you
knows
guys
authority.
it.
realize the logical fallacy of writing someone off because there's a billionaire?
No,
Address
no, no,
his
no, no,
issue.
no.
Come
No,
at
no.
it.
The logical fallacy is to give them credibility because they
No
have
one
a
is
lot of
saying
money.
to write. No one is
I
saying to write.
cited
him
the
off.
fact that he
Yeah.
ran one of the
Problem
largest
is,
hedge
if
funds
you
in the
cite him
world.
as an authority only because he has that money, it's the same logic that would say, well, Donald Trump, when he says something, whatever he's saying must have authority behind it because he had
Ken
money.
Griffith
Can I just jump
wasn't
in here for
born
a
with
minute
money.
on
Hold
the?
on,
Ken
hold on, guys.
Griffith was an entrepreneur in the United States of America. You all are gumping.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Elon
You
Musk
all are
also wasn't.
No, you guys are
money.
categorizing this
Neither was,
individual because he's a millionaire in the box with all of the millionaires.
Guys, Deborah's
this
trying to
gentleman
speak,
wasn't.
please.
That doesn't
let-
mean
sorry,
that
go ahead,
there
go
are
ahead.
authorities on what the world should be like.
So can I just say, so I live in New York, and I think that one of the crime issues that Hochul is facing is the fact that the whole thing with bail reform. Bail reform backfired. Okay, it was this program to not make criminals pay bail. They should be let go and then go free. And it backfired because a lot of those people went out and committed more crimes. And so I think that it was not all of them, but I think that gave the Republicans ammunition. And unfortunately, what happens, I think, in a midterm election or in any election is every party wants to blame the other one. And the party that's in power, if there's a situation that exists, then whoever is in power at the time must be to blame for it. And without looking any further than what happened yesterday and not understanding how the situation came to be over time. And that, Joe Biden, I don't think there's a human being on this planet that could have stepped into the presidency at this point and done what people would consider to be a good job. I think it was an impossible job, just trying to pick up where the country was. And especially now, everybody is fighting with listen to us right here, okay? We're not even like having a repartee. One person speaks, the other person listens. It's just the emotions are so high. And it's a really scary thing for me that that people are voting their emotions and not thinking things through. And that's, and so I believe that the Republicans are using fear as a motivator. Now, that doesn't mean everything they say is wrong, but that I think that they're using that emotion to get their point across, which means they don't need a point. They just need to scare you. And I think that the Democrats were not as conscientious about, laying out, I don't want to say in a calm way, because it's really difficult in this milieu to be able to say things rationally and have people listen. I was just looking just before I came up here. There's a thing from the Washington Post popped up on my tablet, and it says, "Will the GOP retake Congress? Will election deniers gain power? Spend election night with the Post for live results and analysis." Is this news or is this a drama on television? I mean, it's not. This is what we're subjected to constantly. It's not about it's not about facts anymore. It's about having people subscribe to your media, organization. It's about making it really interesting. And so the facts get lost and the people get lost. And it's a scary time, I think, for everyone.
And what Dr. Zay, before we jump on, before we continue, I was just listening to, just as before the polls were closing, there folks, over 42 million people. I think Simone mentioned it. This is record breaking numbers that we're seeing in terms of voter turnout. Over 42 million people voted already before the polls shut down today. And so they were saying this is actually shattering 2018 records, right? In addition to that, CNN had a show about an hour or two ago where they revealed that 54% compared to 44% of Americans say that the Republican Party is too extreme. However, on that same note, the same majority of Americans trust the Republican Party when it comes down to addressing inflation, addressing crime like we've been discussing, the immigration crisis at the border, and the economy overall. So what is this discrepancy? Why is there a discrepancy between the majority of Americans saying that this party is too extreme, yet they're still willing to give them power to address issues like inflation? Anyone?
Money.
Storytelling discipline.
Money is sorry, Nathan.
The GOP has better storytelling discipline, right? They had their 5 points way early on, and they've been, hitting those 5 points, 5 being an arbitrary number, not a legitimate number, but they've been hitting those points every opportunity they get, every question they get. The candidates and their circuits have been able to turn, every question into, Joe Biden's inflation and Joe Biden's crime wave. The GOP hasn't actually put forward a plan to stop inflation, right? It's the same with Obamacare, right? They had been talking for years about repeal and replace Obamacare, never mentioned what they were going to replace it with. And when they actually had the opportunity to do so, they fell flat on their faces. The UK is, in the middle of a year of 4 emperors because, the previous prime minister tried to pass the GOP financial platform and nearly bankrupted the country, but there hasn't been that same ability on the Democratic side or the same media infrastructure, to be completely honest, to be able to get people on and continuously say, they're not right and their, reckless ideas are going to, cause, Armageddon effectively. The Republicans have been much more consistent in their ability to say that.
Well, why haven't the Democrats forced the Republicans to answer? Like, I was looking at U.S. Capitol Police data. They said that in the first 3 months of this year alone, the U.S. Capitol Police have opened roughly 1,820 cases of threats against federal lawmakers, right? And that's in addition to what we saw when a gentleman in Ohio bought a nail gun to the FBI headquarters in the aftermath of the search at Mar-a-Lago. That's in the aftermath of January 6th. That's in the aftermath of, this gentleman sending bombs to the CNN headquarters, to President Obama's house, a place of residence, to the Clintons' place of residence, and George Soros. Why is it that the Democrats are letting them control the narrative on crime? And it seems as if the majority of, the people taking these actions against the institutions that we know as, the federal government institutions, they're in alignment with trying to overturn what they see as an attack on the country as they know it. They see this as an illegitimate presidency. They see it as them doing the will of their leader, their fearless leader, Donald Trump. Why haven't the Democrats charged them with supporting and even letting these things go and not looking for accountability?
Yeah, Mike, I don't know if this is an issue of the parties, like Democratic or Republican Party. I think when you're talking about, this information situation, like we talked earlier about how the Washington Post were like kind of promoting the election tonight, right? So, a lot of this anger and these narratives are actually just being promoted through, your media company, your Fox News, or even through your social medias. And, that's one of the reasons why I think people are a lot more angry today and a lot more aggressive. I think like Professor Cook, I agree with you when you brought forth the data, right? The data says, the crime rates are lower than it was,
not lower
years ago in New York City or but the thing is people aren't looking for, the facts or the data, right? They're reacting off of what they see on their television in the evening, or what they read on their news feed, or what that radio host is yelling at them and telling them about what is happening. Like there's a caravan coming from, Latin America, right? Like none of that is true, but like that is what people want to believe, right? So when we talk about the situation like in New York City, that is what people are feeling. If it's, there any merit to it or not, it doesn't really matter. It's about the narrative that's being pushed. So I think the question really is like, how, will the Democratic Party kind of push back on that, right? And kind of, control that narrative or push back on some of these false narratives, because look, we might take a hit, like, during this election because of, some of these narratives that are being pushed throughout, your social medias and your news agencies.
Yeah, but if you believe facts matter, it's incumbent upon all of us, educated, relatively competent human beings, to talk about the facts. It's not incumbent upon us to promote the so-called Democratic Party or the Republican Party agenda. Those agendas change from time to time, and those agendas, quite frankly, don't have much to do with people who look like us as a general proposition. But if facts matter, then it's incumbent upon us to talk about facts and not get caught up in the emotion. It's incumbent upon us also not to let media narratives drive our facts. So the media is not innocent in this either. It's not as though the media was this impartial arbiter and presenter of information. They drive agenda as well. And that's fine, as long as you understand that as a consumer of what the media is putting out there. And it's incumbent upon us to talk to our friends, neighbors, family, whatever, and try to drive factual discussions. Easy, not easy at all. But that's one of the tasks that we have. Those of you who went to the Harvard University School of Law know that that's your social engineering obligation. So yeah, we got to try to drive the facts. And that's why I keep shaking my head. And I'm not attacking you, Ish. I'm saying that when you say something to me that has as its premise a wealthy guy may know a lot, a wealthy guy may not know anything. We in this society oftentimes get way too confused about associating an accumulation of wealth with some kind of virtue. Those are two different things. And I don't know this gentleman. I don't know whether he knows. I don't know whether he knows what he's thinking about or not. I tend to think, in my experience, with very wealthy people who have created businesses, those are hard jobs, and he has done a lot of work, and he doesn't have time to become an expert in crime because he's running a multi-billion-dollar business, and I get that. So all I'm saying is, his personal experience is his personal experience, but it shouldn't necessarily be used as a template for us to think about, to see the world through his eyes. He may be right, he may be wrong, but it's not because he's wealthy.
So Professor Cook,
sorry, if I could just respond to what Dr. Cook was addressing towards me really quickly, and I would agree with that, and that's why I wasn't trying to cite his wealth. I was trying to cite the fact that this was an individual who had his headquarters, I believe Citadel is the name of the hedge fund, was headquartered in Chicago, in a major financial district of the world, and he, as the leader of that business, decided to make a decision, and tried to make a decision to move that business to Miami because he cited things such as like packs of youth running downtown, beating up people, robbing people, and the frequency at which it happened. Now, life in a big city, not to make small light of that, but Chicago is a massive city, and to your point, statistically, like looking at the population and the number of incidents of crime, it probably is somewhat still relatively low. But as someone who lives in Chicago, you get the sense of violence on the streets. You get the sense of not being safe at times walking downtown, of walking in certain neighborhoods. That's very real to a lot of people here. And I think that's what Jerry was citing to earlier. So I wasn't citing, but Ken Griffin was just an example. There's an entire argument to be made behind why I think that crime is a legitimate issue that Democrats are being soft on, and we can get into that because it's a complicated position, but I'll leave it to Deborah now. But I just wanted to.
I think that's your reality because you live in Chicago and it's so population heavy. It's so dense that, like you said, the crime to population ratio is a lot higher to where I live. I live downtown in my city in Florida. I don't experience crime in the same way that you might. So if somebody were to ask me, how is crime an issue for you? How is crime, is that something that you're worried about? I'm going to say no, because it's suburban around here. That's not something that I worry about. And so it's all based on the reality that, you experience every day. So like in New York, there's so many people there, 500 million people, that of course you're going to experience some type of crime. But to say that, it's, omnipresent in the entire country.
Who said that?
I mean, that was the kind of vibe that we got. I mean,
okay, vibe. Okay, please don't attach that to what I said because of a vibe.
I mean, you were saying that crime is a big issue, and that's
it is.
A lot of us.
I didn't say it was omnipresent, as in a present everywhere at all times. That I think that was just an exaggeration that I want to.
When we talk about the story, sorry to continue.
Hold on, Nate. Let Dr. Blaine. Dr. Blaine, you're going to come in.
Yeah, thank you. So I was just wanted to address what Dr. Cook was saying, because in saying how it's incumbent upon us to look at the facts and to have our friends look at the facts, and I agree with you 1,000%, and it's a very noble desire and thing to be striven for, and I think that we used to be better at that as a population. But I mean, I think we need to look at not the world as we want it to be in certain cases, but the world as we find it, and then work with that. And unfortunately, the world that I'm seeing in the political venue is that people are not thinking things out rationally, let's put it this way. There's a significant percentage of the population that is not thinking with their minds. They're thinking with their emotions. They're not really thinking. And so I think it's really important to find a way to reach those people, because talking to them isn't going to help. They're not open to that. And so I think that's our real challenge, is to get through on a level that they're able to empathize with somehow. And it's going to have to be emotional. It has to touch them emotionally, because it's just not working any other way. And I don't have an answer.
I think the Democratic Party has done a lot to damage the fact-based discussions that you and Dr. Cook are longing for. Because when I was at Howard University, and not to call out I love my alma mater, and I think they do a tremendous amount of good in the world, far more than any negative. But there was a professor in a class full of students where she was getting paid a tuition, said that women aren't the only gender that can have children. And I just started to ask her to cite her research. And I'm only bringing it up to say that the Democratic Party decides truth in a way that Foucault would call power knowledge. It's only knowledge because they have the power of the society. And I'm not making any qualitative judgments about I'm not making any qualitative judgments about whether that's a correct or incorrect statement. I'm saying it was made in a law classroom as if it was as a qualitative statement. Please.
True to her?
Huh?
She
was a teacher in a classroom talking to students, and she spoke at
something. Gender is a social construct. So
we were in a law class about constitutional law.
What she was trying to teach.
If we're talking constitutional law, gender is a protected class under constitutional analysis. But speaking earlier to what we were talking about,
she was like
crime and storytelling, and what Professor Cook said earlier about.
That's an example of a larger issue of Democrats dictating knowledge based on the power that they control in the culture. That's all. It's a postmodernist idea.
But how does she get to be emblematic of Democrats, Ish?
Because that position is sympathized a lot with with the far left and extreme of the Democratic Party, in my estimation.
I think because there's a lot of
also recognized in the medical community, the wider medical community, and the psychological community. Because now that we're in the year 2022, the general medical and psychological community no longer identifies gender dysmorphia or gender dysphoria as a medical or a psychological condition. It recognizes it as a fallout of social constructs that have lasted for a few hundred years, where people who are born genetically one way are assigned a particular gender. And as Tia mentioned, gender is a construct. There is never been a set list of genders. All sorts of different communities throughout all of history have had several different definitions of what gender is in multiple different numbers, not just one or two, male, female, man, woman, but a whole slew in between.
I understand. I understand that it's a
Democrat using like cultural authority to say what something is. I get where you're coming from, that you were uncomfortable with the way she just kind of said that as a fact to you into the class,
because it seems to be like if
someone were to say the exact opposite and say, well, there are two genders, that's just the way things are, Democrats are trying to change things. No, there are currently, the majority of the society we are currently living in identifies two genders, but historically that's just not been the case. So what was really going on is that there are social conservatives who are saying that the truth is there are two genders, and other people are changing that. Whereas it's just an ongoing experience of what the definition of gender is.
But that's going to be central to having a fact-based conversation, though, because that's where the line is. That's where the cutting edge is. So I would love to hear I would love to hear Deborah's insight if we get there. But yeah,
hold on. Let's pull things closer to this election. We've talked about crime. In addition to that,
sorry, can I just step in real quick? I don't mean to interrupt, but since you're bringing up crime again, I wanted to just respond to something Dr. Blaine said earlier. So I don't live in New York, so I can't say the experience of living in New York. But you said, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you said the phrase something along the lines of bail reform failed. Now, the issue I take with that is, even when cash bail existed, there was nothing to stop someone who committed a crime, or even if they hadn't committed a crime, going back out and either committing another crime or subsequently going on to commit a crime. The only difference between that system and a bail reform system is that the people who got to leave under cash bail are the people who had money to pay for it. The bail reform is you're supposed to, some people may have made a mistake, that happens. But what's supposed to happen under a bail reform system is that there's an analysis of the individual and the situation and the chances of that individual going back out and committing some kind of crime, whether or not they committed one to begin with, but committing some crime. Is that going to be perfect 100% of the time? No.
So but we didn't need bail reform for that, because you already had a system in place where the judge was supposed to look at the suspect or the person who's being arraigned and make that decision. The judge has always had the ability and then the authority to release someone on their own recognizance. It was not required that the judge assign bail. And what happened, at least in the perception of a lot of New Yorkers, was that now the judge was required to let people off without any bail. And so there was, I never understood why we needed to have that at all. We should just have encouraged the judges to say, hey, if it looks like they're, it's okay to let them go on their own recognizance, you should do it. But what I was looking at was, what about the victims of those crimes? When someone is victimized and the person who gets caught is now back out on the street. Let's say somebody just snatched their purse. Wait, let me finish. Let's say they just had their purse snatched. Okay, now they gotta change all their credit cards, get a new driver's license, maybe replace their keys. The sensation, the feeling of being violated is real. And for them to then go about and say, oh, well, the guy just got off, it doesn't give a sense of justice. And the perception of that rule, which I think was entirely unnecessary, because the judge already had the authority to make that decision without it being a thing. Oh, we're not going to make people pay bail. So I personally think
that's factually correct. Just factually, legally correct. The judges were required to post bail, to impose a money bond to release someone, and the bail reform laws were created to make the default position that everyone is supposed to be released on their personal promise to return, unless money bail was needed to assure the safety of the public or the return of the defendant for further litigation. So it was necessary to do that because in New York, where I practiced from time to time, bail was required. Judges,
you would know that better than me.
Didn't have the ability not to impose bail. And as Zach said, the only real difference in a net effect kind of difference is that people who did very bad things and could assure the judge that they would return from trial and maybe not harm anybody because they had the requisite amount of money were out and about. That didn't keep them from committing another crime. It just meant that their money was up. So bail reform has not really failed. I think what has happened is that people talk about it as though it was inherently failing. There are a number of studies that show the result of crime rates before bail reform was instituted and after, recidivism after. If you believe that the person who's charged with a crime is innocent until 12 people in a box decide that they're guilty, then causing them to be incarcerated before that determination is made is problematic from my perspective. Maybe it's because I'm just a defense counsel, but I guarantee you I was a prosecutor for a while, so I've prosecuted people too. So bail reform has not failed. What we're talking about is the elimination of money as the determinant of whether you get out or not. If you are dangerous, if you look like a flight risk, you can still have money bail imposed or be detained without bail. In the District of Columbia, where we got rid of money bail, if you have committed a homicide, if you're charged rather with committing a homicide, you don't get bail. Okay, you don't get out. Okay, and there's a whole slew of other circumstances that will keep you from getting out, even though we don't don't provide money bail as a default position. Bail reform, it gets such a bad rap for being the cause of crime, and it's not. It just simply is not. It never has been.
So let's
we also with bail
one other
reforms.
big thing. One other big thing is that we've all, and Professor Cook, mentioned this a couple of times, but we were all just now talking about bail and bail reform, as have many people arguing against it, as if everyone who is arrested and laid up and put in front of the bail judge to determine if they're going to have it did what they were accused of. This is a country that is meant to be built on the proposition that you are innocent until proven guilty. If we operate under the assumption that because you have been put before the bail judge, you committed that crime, and therefore to release you is to release a guilty person. For instance, Dr. Blaine, you mentioned the purse snatcher and the victim of that. They need justice. They need to have that person behind bars. Well, no, they need the person who stole their purse behind bars. And that is not necessarily the same person who's been brought up before the bail judge. It is actually a greater shame to a greater violation of their need for justice to potentially put someone who did not commit that crime in jail on cash bail that they could not afford, and then not look for the actual person who committed it if the person who was arrested was innocent. And
it would be better if we could do that. If we could have that trial.
I don't like that thinking.
Early, if we could have that trial in a reasonable period of time, so that the person who is sure that that's the person who stole my purse, they identified them, I saw their face, I know it was them. If that person, if it doesn't take 6 months for their trial to come up, where that the person who feels wronged and violated doesn't have to, walk around feeling terrified.
The problem with that is that we still have the story of Khalif Browder, who spent 3 years on Rikers Island. The problem is the story of Khalif Browder, who still spent 3 years on Rikers Island, a pre-trial detention center, because he couldn't post a bail for the crime he was accused of, which was petty theft, which he was ultimately exonerated.
That's just disgusting. Why does it take 3 years for that to go?
Because he couldn't afford to buy his freedom. When we talk about the backlash to bail reform and what Professor Hochul was talking about earlier with the media, when we talk about these rises in crimes, like Professor Cook said, the biggest rises in crimes are due to gun policies in red states. But that's not what we see, as a resident of the tri-state area. When I turn on Eyewitness News with the local news, when we talk about crime waves, we don't see white people with guns. We see black people with guns terrorizing old ladies. These are the images that are shown to us.
I don't know. I see a lot of white people going to schools and shooting them up. I don't.
When we talk about crime surges, we're not talking. No one ever mentions school shootings. No one ever mentions lax gun policies. We talk about crime in the inner city. We talk about black people, gangs of black people running around.
Because it's more
harassing and terrorizing people, like when Lee Zeldin can talk about.
It's not more frequent, but the challenge is that politicians, elected officials, won't fund the justice system at a way that will provide for more speedy trials. We need more prosecutors. We need more defense counsel. We need more judges. We need more court personnel. We need more various people. If it's funded, then it can move more quickly, and you don't have to have 3 years waiting for a trial as opposed to 6 months. But that's
would that be done?
If you want justice, as we like to say in law school, if you want equity, you got to do equity. So if you want a fair system, you've got to fund it fairly so it can produce a result. You can't underfund it and then criticize it for not functioning well.
Are we doing that on the state level?
Like here in New York with Lee Zeldin.
If I can jump
state level, hold on.
State and local level. State and local level.
Hold on, guys. I do want to transition. When we're looking at these races, they're very, very close. Let's bring it back closer to home in terms of the Senate races, particularly. When you're looking at some of the Senate races, you got Raphael Warnock, the current incumbent, at 37%, right? You got him, 538 gives him a 37% chance of winning, but they give Herschel Walker a 63% chance of winning. They give John Fetterman a 44% chance of winning. Dr. Oz a 56% chance of winning. Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, 49% chance of winning. Adam Laxalt, 51% chance of winning. Mark Kelly in Arizona, 67%. This is the one Democrat that has more of a chance, according to 538's polling, of winning against his opponent, Blake Masters, 33%. Maggie Hassan. And that race is interesting because the Democrats actually encouraged the Republicans in that state, New Hampshire, to actually choose her opponent, Bolduc, who is an election denier, someone who believes that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. Well, Bolduc is at a 28% chance. My favorite Senate race right now is the race in Ohio between Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance. And I say that because I believe Tim Ryan's messaging was right on target with what the Democratic Party nationally could have benefited from. I think that he was doing excellent for a state that has gone Republican since 2016. I want to get your thoughts. And it doesn't have to be just the Senate, the House of Representatives as well. I know Virginia's 7th district is looked at as a bellwether. Earlier this summer, we had a district race in New York that was looked at as a canary in the coal mine because it usually is kind of like a precursor to how the election will go, and the Democrats won that House seat. What elections are you guys looking at across the board, and which, if you're, I guess, brave enough to make some predictions as to how they would go based on what you've seen? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, Mike, I think we talked about this earlier, but this has always been an uphill battle for Democrats, right? And especially in some of these historically red states. When you look at Georgia, when you look at Ohio, I think there was discussion about Ohio. That race, maybe being close, but if you look at what has taken place over the last few election cycles, you make the argument that Ohio is no longer a swing state, right? So Tim Ryan has a major challenge there. And when you look at Georgia and the fact that Herschel Walker, is competing in the way that he is, and he could very likely win that race. It says, not much, I don't think, about the messaging of the Democratic Party at the time. I think it just talks more about the historical patterns of the way that we vote, right? So there's this thing, Democrat complacency in midterm elections. Democrats come out in the general election and presidential elections, but many times our base don't come out in the midterm election. I think we might be seeing that. And then our other disadvantage is the fact that Democrats are already in power. I think I'm looking particularly at the race as a Texas. I'm looking at the race here in Texas for governor between Beto and Greg Abbott. I think I'm not looking at it because I'm not saying I think Beto's going to win. But I think when you looked at it a few years ago, during the midterm election, Beto ran against Ted Cruz for Senate. And that was a very, very close race, right? And that race was close because it said more to me about the turnout of the Democratic Party. Right now, Beto is running against Greg Abbott, and this race isn't nearly as close, right? So if I'm here in Texas looking at these numbers coming in from Beto and Greg Abbott, and it is nowhere close, then it's telling me that the Democratic Party, the base voters, are not coming out. They did not come out and show during this midterm election, and that is going to have ramifications all across the country.
Speaking of governor's races, look at Carrie Lake. Carrie Lake and her opponent, the Democratic opponent, who didn't even want to debate her, right? Carrie Lake is a figure that has gotten a lot of attention because a lot of folks are saying that's Donald Trump's favorite candidate in this whole cycle and potentially a running mate, as he's eyeing the 15th of this month, next Tuesday, to make a big announcement, right? Carrie Lake is polling pretty steadily at 49.5% ahead of her opponent, Hobbs, at 47.1%. And going back to what we mentioned in the preface of the show, with Bolsonaro in Brazil, even saying that the election in Brazil is rigged, right? Echoing what he heard from Donald Trump just 2 years ago. And then you've also got the Israeli parliamentary elections, the fourth one in 5 years. The fifth one in 4 years, where Netanyahu kind of makes this deal with the far right to kind of build a coalition that would put him back in power. A lot of people are wondering, can I have faith in the democratic institutions, right? If Carrie Lake is in charge of the state of Arizona, and she publicly said, look, if Arizona goes for Biden, I'm not going to stand for that. I'm like, what can we expect, right? Or is this just going to be something where this is going to be probably the last clear-cut election that we'll experience?
Yes,
I don't think
because there's a lot of secretaries of states races right now with election deniers being very open. There's a coalition, I forget the name, I think it's called America First, for secretaries of state, of just MAGAs, like all across the board running for Secretary of State, and they've said we're not going to certify for anyone but Donald Trump. And a lot of them are running unopposed. So I think this might be one of the last elections, presidential, midterm, that will be fair and of the people's voices, to be quite honest.
That's pretty apocalyptic type like language to make it seem.
They're running unopposed.
Because
I mean, we're in apocalyptic type times.
Everyone feels that way. Everyone feels that way, and I think we're headed that way. But no, just because if people start accepting elections, then wait, well, what if the army stops accepting the results of elections? Or like that's how actual collapses like happen. But just to kind of bring it back to what Mike said, mentioning Brazil, Bolsonaro ultimately conceded power and handed over power. So at the end of the day, society, I think, and I'm hoping and praying, will rise above this. And like you said, these Secretary of States, they're not tyrants. They have checks and balances just like the next guy. And if they try to exceed them, hopefully they will be prosecuted and they will be called out. So I just wanted to say that like this, I don't see it as that much in doom and gloom. And to cite one example, Bolsonaro has already like transitioned power. So I just want to throw that into the mix.
Unfortunately, history, I would love to have faith in everything that you just said, but history does not necessarily bear that out. And, it wasn't that long ago in the 1938, 1939, when the German people thought, oh, this couldn't possibly happen. Oh, everything's going to be okay. We haven't, educated population. And look what happened. I mean, it started with these same, like this, and look where that got us. And it's something that I'm very sensitive to. Because it's part of my history. And I just feel like even for the last 6 years, I've been feeling like my grandfather is over my shoulder saying, get out, get out, get out. Like he did. He fled Poland in 1938. And I'm first generation American, and I wouldn't be here. And most of my family didn't make it because, but my grandfather had the foresight to say, nope, this isn't good. I don't want to just believe everything's going to be okay. And this is the kind of foreboding that precedes something like that when a dictator takes power. And I know that I see the look you're giving me, Ish, but I'm going to tell you that historically it happens. And I believe this is how it starts. And I think we need to find a way to—
Who would be the dictator here in this scenario?
Well,
or do we have one yet or no? Donald Trump.
Donald Trump aspires to be a dictator.
No, I know, and that's the answer I wanted to hear, because my point that I have raised against that is that, and this is not going to be as you can tell, I'm Mike bring me here to bring the counterpoint, but no, when it comes to Donald Trump, there's a lot of articles and things about how he was actually going against the deep state, going against the FBI.
Exactly
what deep state was he going against? When you're the president, you are the deep state. But this,
like, okay, I understand that's a charged term, and I'm sorry for throwing out a charged term, because it's like bait in the water. But what I mean by deep state is a mix of that with the blob, which Obama has talked about. It's just this establishment. It's just an establishment that's going to do whatever it wants to do, despite elected representatives. And Donald
Trump, the reason it's Donald Trump-ish is because Donald Trump is the one who would not accept the election results. It's the first time that I know of in our history of the United States that he just refuses right up to now to accept the election results. And personally, I feel like if you don't play by the rules, you're not allowed to play. Like
him not accepting the results. Sorry, I don't think that is right.
He was to say that it was stolen from him. He said that earlier this week.
But maybe he's the guy who genuinely felt that. Maybe he can genuinely feel that.
Part of what's so concerning is that even in 1860,
let's be clear about what we're saying, though.
Did not say that they didn't believe the election had happened. They
did things to try to take power. They did things to try to take,
and then they seceded. Even back then, when they decided we were going to leave the country and form a new one because of how awful we think this election was, they didn't challenge that the election was bad.
What steps did Donald Trump take to not transition the power of the presidency to his predecessor.
spent
What state
the
did he?
entire
January
month-
6th.
Please.
Hello.
Oh,
Yeah, right.
expound. You just
In the election,
want to say
challenging
2 words and then you
authority
say, "Oh yeah,
suing
you're
in
right."
court.
A lot
Okay,
of-
well, okay.
a
So
lot
if
of
you want the
time.
legal
One at a
answer, he
time.
tried
One
a
at a
scam.
time. One at a time,
Trump's
please.
attempt to overturn the election in 2020 included a bunch of lawsuits with theories that were so ridiculous that his
Lawsuit.
top lawyer
Oh,
lost his
so you're
license to
telling me that he
practice
tried
law.
to overthrow the
Then
system
once
by
that
going
failed,
through the lawful means of the system?
then once
What a
his
law-abiding citizen.
legal
What are you
attempts
saying?
failed,
Ish.
he
Legal
tried
attempts,
to
not
circumvent
illegal,
the
right?
law.
Okay, go ahead.
Once
By
his
going
legal
through the
attempts
law.
failed, he tried
Gotcha,
to
gotcha.
circumvent the law
How so?
by
Calling Secretary. He did call the
pressuring
Secretary of State.
Hold
I
on,
guess
Ishmael.
that
by
might have been
pressuring
illegal. That might have
secretaries
been
of
illegal.
state to overturn election results.
That might have been illegal.
Might
That
have been illegal. Ed.
might
Listen,
have been illegal. That
guys,
might have. I don't know if
It
he
might
did
have
it. I
been
don't know if he
illegal.
the Donald Trump had actively taken steps by pressuring his vice president Mike Pence to not certify under the 12th Amendment. The vice president's responsibility is to it's really a ceremonial role, certify the election by counting the votes with both chambers present. That was already the plan was for that to go forward, but Pence was supposed to kind of be the roadblock. And when Pence stood his ground, Ted Cruz served as the point guard, basically to say, I'm going to offer up a legal, some kind of legal challenge to not ultimately overturn the election abruptly, but to kind of put a challenge there to muddy the water and to say that there are alternative electors. He pressured Bill Barr in December, his attorney general. Bill Barr refused and said that there is no basis for the Justice Department to declare that there was anything fraudulent as it pertained to how Wisconsin conducted its electoral vote count, how Pennsylvania did, or how the state of Georgia did. He pressured Brad Raffensperger, who's currently a candidate for Secretary of State, saying, and there's a recording of the call saying, I just need 11,000 more votes. Give me a break. He also has actively candidates who are running on his behalf saying that I will overturn the election when our boss gets back into the arena. And so all of these things in conjunction metastasized into January 6th, and we still see the overflowing of it now. He refused to accept defeat, and we're seeing that people are campaigning on his refusal to accept defeat, and even the influence of it exceeds the United States, as case point in Brazil, Bolsonaro. But I do want to also, as we're, I guess going on with time, and also a phenomenon about this election that we haven't touched on is the effect of ticket splitting. The thing that's fascinating to me is how Warnock and Herschel Walker are so close in polling, yet it seems like Brian Kemp is running away with this election. And usually folks vote down, down ballot for the straight party, right? But obviously there are some Warnock Kemp voters. And so in my view, like, what do these two candidates have in common, right? Brian Kemp supports SB 202, right? A bill that has made it increasingly difficult for minorities to vote. It decreased the amount of the early voting process. It eliminated voting.
No, I don't think that means Warnock Kemp voters are ascendant. I think it means that there are Kemp voters and there are Kemp voters who won't vote for Herschel. I don't think they're Warnock Kemp voters. I think that the reason, the explanation from a very old guy of why this race in Georgia is close is racism, plain and simple. They're not voting for Herschel Walker. They're voting against anything that's not anything that is Warnock, anything that's liberal, anything that's progressive, anything that's Democrat. They don't believe Herschel Walker is competent to be senator. They don't believe Herschel's stories about what he did and didn't do. Those things are irrelevant. Herschel Walker represents the anti-Warnock, and that's good enough.
But how did you cite racism and then go on to point everything besides race to support that?
Because the majority of the voters in the Republican Party in Georgia are white. They are voting against a black man and voting for a black man who is a tool of white people. Again,
okay. If you paint him like that, yeah, okay.
No. I'm not painting him like that. He put himself in that box.
But what if he truly
having lived through the so-called modern civil rights movement, I've seen that movie more than once. Okay.
But what if those are his truly heartfelt beliefs that he's not a tool? He just happened to align with that white establishment. Then what?
It's not about
Well, I think
Walker's
what's happening
beliefs.
It's not about his
how he
beliefs. It's
serves
not about
Mitch
him.
McConnell's
It's not-
later
Why
power.
not?
It's not what he believes. It's what the people who are voting for him believe.
And I think
you
what's
said
happening
he
in
was a
Georgia.
tool.
One vote.
You said he was a tool, as if he can't have those heartfelt beliefs
He
as a
clearly
black man.
Is a
Okay,
tool.
and
He's a
like,
tool for
he
that
doesn't
just proves that a
believe
black
what
man
he's
can't
running
be wrong.
against. He
Like,
clearly
like-
doesn't believe what he's running against because of he paid for an abortion for someone who got pregnant by him. But then his whole campaign was about abortions and making it illegal. And so you can tell that he's just a mouthpiece. He just wants to be
No,
famous.
but a human being is a complicated thing, so I don't think it's that easy to say.
You
What
can
are
be
you
a
saying?
tool and not realize it. I spent 8 years in the
You're
United
more
States.
likely to be a tool if you don't realize it.
I spent 8 years in the United States Air Force working for the intelligence community. Okay, there are people used by the intelligence community who don't even know they're being used by the intelligence community. Okay, they're tools of the intelligence community.
All
and they
elected
don't even know
representatives
it.
are tools. They're
Say
tools
again?
for the people. All elected representatives are tools for the people that the people elect and want to
No.
use for their
let me say
benefit.
this.
They're
Let me
not
say
serving
this.
Professor Cook, and ish.
I'm
Professor
using
Cook,
tool
I
in the
think.
most pejorative way possible. Okay, I'm
But
not
why?
talking about.
Okay,
I'm not
get what
talking about
I get what-
a facilitator. I'm talking about somebody who is being manipulated and not realize it. That doesn't make them bad people.
But if you use the word,
that means that
but
they're
if you-
being
but
manipulated
that's
by
the-
somebody else.
But that's the issue with your argument, because if you use the word manipulated, then you're trying to insinuate that he doesn't have those beliefs himself, which
It's not necessarily.
It doesn't make any difference what he
Evidence
believes.
of everything.
It doesn't make any
Why not?
difference what he
He
believes.
contradicts
Why
everything
not?
he's ever said. There's evidence that he contradicts every single
But a
thing
human
that
being
he's
is a
done.
complicated thing. A human being can like
Even-
I can say I don't like eating cheeseburgers because they bad for me, but eat a cheeseburger. Like, human beings are complicated. Sorry
And
for
you're
all the
absolutely
Even
right.
with
Yeah.
what
Willy-nilly.
Yes, people get
Yeah,
used all
Mike,
the time.
Mike, if we take a
and
step
don't-
back,
Sorry,
really
Zach.
and they're not
Sorry, Zach.
Yeah,
participants.
if I could jump in real quick, Professor Cook, if we take a
Go ahead,
step
Barry.
back, what I think what is really happening here in Georgia is really, you have to take a look at the demographic there. And I'm talking about in regards to the political demographic of the type of voters that are there. And I think in Georgia, you have a large percentage of Republican voters who are a lot more moderate, right? Who do not like Donald Trump, right? So they're supporting Kemp because Kemp stood up against Donald Trump, and these are very moderate, rational type of conservatives who would not vote for the Republican just because they're Republican, right? So they wouldn't vote for Herschel Walker just because they won't just fall in line with that. So I can see a lot of moderate type of rational, if you say Republicans who would never support Donald Trump, right? But they are conservatives and will vote Republican every single year, who are behind Kemp mainly because he stood up to Trump, and they would not support Herschel Walker because one, he is a Trump guy, and then two, he is just so outlandish and he's so incompetent at this point that these type of moderate voters support him. And I think there is such a large, percentage in that state that that is the reason why, Mike, you are seeing a lot of voters who are voting for Kemp and they're also voting for Walker. I think those suburban type of moderate Republicans who are splitting their ticket in that way.
So I want to also add in, because I think one thing that wasn't brought up is that Herschel Walker has no legislative record. There is no legislative record to see where he falls on the political spectrum, because even within conservatism, you have folks who are saying, well, Lindsey Graham should not have made an announcement about his position on abortion and his ban on like there's variations. But where does Herschel Walker stand? There's no political background. He's plucked straight out of the sports world and placed in this arena to be a candidate. He got Trump's stamp of approval, and you compare that to Raphael Warnock, who in all honesty, he didn't have a legislative record, but he still
like Warnock,
his politics was more clear as a candidate in 2020. And now that he does have a legislative record, he bought back the bacon to Georgia as it pertains to the Inflation Reduction Act, as it pertains to the infrastructure bill from last year. And so he has literal legislative accomplishments he can run on. And then when it comes down to abortion, I like his position. And I think more folks should in the Democratic Party should jump on it. And in conservative states, the doctor's room, he says repeatedly, is too small a place for the physician, a woman, and the United States government. And I think that message resonates with folks who are conservative and happen to be African American. I think it was cynical for them to put Herschel Walker in there. I agree with Professor Cook. I think the whole goal was to kind of split the black vote because they saw that African Americans came out in droves in 2020 and came out in droves in the runoff in 2021, resulting in John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock's victories. But I think that would ultimately backfire. Out of all of the Senate races, I think Raphael Warnock is more secure than a lot of Democrats right now, because when you're looking at it, who do you trust behind the cockpit right now? You know, Herschel Walker, who said climate change is not an issue because we have enough trees, or who actually has a legislative background and accomplishments.
I want to push back a little bit against the framing that Herschel Walker was chosen as the candidate where to split the black vote because black voters aren't stupid. It's more so that Herschel Walker was chosen to be the nominee for Georgia so that Republicans could run a black candidate and insulate themselves from claims of racism as they continue to hurl all sorts of smears at Raphael Warnock. We saw the campaign they ran against him in the runoff 2 years ago, where they basically ran the Jeremiah Wright playbook against him and it failed. So I don't necessarily think that was the right option, but it was the playbook they ran on anyway.
I think they were also betting on his old days of like he was a great football star and that Black people or our community really admires people like that. But I really hope that Georgians saw through that. I believe that Georgia has a voter suppression problem, not, an agenda problem. So we'll really find out, what the issues they really care about are.
So in that line, in that same vein, do you think we're likely to see a runoff in Georgia between Warnock and Herschel Walker? And also, even among the governor's race, we kind of lost track of the fact that the whole premise of the question was, why is there a discrepancy between the Warnock voters and the Stacey Abrams voters? I think Stacey Abrams has been a fantastic, person for the Democrats in the South. Remember, before Stacey Abrams, before Beto O'Rourke, the Democrats were virtually void of any kind of leadership in the South, in my opinion. And she came and was able to deliver the state of Georgia with her, on the ground work to increase voter turnout. She has wiped away the medical debt of so many folks in the state of Georgia. She has sharp answers as to how she's going to get legislative agenda items accomplished in the governor's mansion. I asked her a question in person as it pertains to SB 202, and she was straight up and honest. She said, as it pertains to Medicare, Social Security, I believe I can be more successful than I would be in the realm of voting rights, but I do believe that we can get something done to get SB 202 repealed. I think she's an excellent candidate, but I don't understand why it's not reflected in the polling.
Yeah, Mike, I think it comes down to, the discussion about the demographic there. And I think when you have a state that is really 50-50 right now, like a very purple state, one group of voters can really change, the entire landscape there. And I think when you look at 2020, when Biden won Georgia, I think there was a lot of those moderate type Republicans who decided to vote for Joe Biden. And I think, because that was because they did not like Trump. And I think here, Brian Kemp has those voters in his corner deeply, right? So there's not going to be many Republican voters who are going to vote for Stacey Abrams. So I think that is the issue that she's running against, is that she won't have that swing voter, right? She won't have that swing Republican voter to jump in and vote for her. So I really think that, that race won't really be that close. I like Stacey Abrams, but, she has a very uphill battle. And I think it's going to be very difficult for her to gain, moderate type Republican voters.
I would say let's not forget that Brian Kemp was basically overseeing his own election last time. I'm not trying to be like an election denier or anything like that, but there was a lot of fishy things going on with that last election. So I don't know. We'll see if it comes around for her this time.
So it was just announced that Wes Moore, a Democrat, a celebrity author, and former nonprofit executive, has been elected Maryland's first African-American governor. This was an interesting race. His opponent, Mr. Cox, has been someone who has repeatedly tried to tie him with a far left, just like many other candidates, right? He's for defunding the police. He's for a radical leftist agenda. He's for political correctness and wokeness. All of these key phrases, and yet it wasn't enough in the state of Maryland. So he's going to be taking over the governor's mansion after Larry Hogan, a Republican who styles himself in the mold of Ronald Reagan. In the mold of Ronald Reagan. And also, I believe it was also announced that Maura Healey was elected in Massachusetts. Anyone's thoughts on those races?
Well, with Maryland, I just have to point out that Maryland is a solidly blue state. And so when you're a Republican governor in a state like Maryland, you basically have to be a very strong politician who's almost tailor-made for the needs of your state, right? Like with Governor-elect Healy now in Massachusetts replaces Charlie Baker, who was a Republican. Massachusetts is one of those blue states that, for whatever reason, loves the Republican governors. Mitt Romney, for example, was governor of Massachusetts before he became a senator from Utah. But, these are the kind of races where if Republicans want to hold on, they have to find almost the perfect candidate. So it's not necessarily a surprise that Healy was able to kind of win so easily, and same with Wes Moore. Now with Stacey Abrams, I do think
Wes Moore ran against a very, very hard to elect Republican. I mean, you're right. There's a 2-to-1 Democrat to Republican voter registration in the state of Maryland, and Governor Hogan did a tremendous job in galvanizing a lot of Democratic people to vote for him. That's the only reason he got elected. The guy Cox, who ran against Wes Moore, was just not that kind of guy at all. Governor Hogan walked away from him, criticized him, called him insane. It was very, very difficult for him to win in Maryland. That really shouldn't be a surprise. It is a little bit of a surprise in Massachusetts because, as you say, they seem to be fascinated with Republican governors in a fundamentally Democratic registration state, but they don't always do it, and this is one of those times. So,
and I think
as far as a little bit of history, though, I also have to mention that Rebecca Balint of Vermont was just elected to Congress, which makes her the first woman elected to Congress from Vermont, which means that a woman has been elected to Congress from every single state in this country, which is history making in and of itself.
And Marco Rubio was reelected. This is a race I saw going in the direction of the Republicans. Marco Rubio is reelected. Ron DeSantis is reelected. Marco Rubio, of course, had presidential ambitions. And of course, now that Trump has sucked up all the oxygen in the room and he set the date, November 15th, he said, you're going to be very, very happy to his audience. He kind of sucked out all the oxygen for who he called Ron DeSantimonious, a new nickname he came out with for his closest rival.
Have you seen DeSantis' campaign ad that says God chose him to do this?
Oh, God.
That's where the sanctimonious thing came from.
I missed that.
Unbelievable. It's an unbelievable ad. I mean, it's
God,
I think well, in the church I grew up in, that would be just facially offensive. You just can't do that.
Yeah.
So as we're landing the plane, I do want to ask you guys, is it a sign of weakness or strength that Trump is planning to announce a third bid for the White House this early, November 15th?
Strength, I think, because he wants to suck all the air out of the room, right? You announce early, you're a guy like Trump, you can win with only 40% of the vote, and you get a lot of the losers basically out of the race early, right? Tom Cotton, for example, just announced that he wasn't running. Of course, no one was really asking Tom Cotton to run for president anyway. But when you are a long shot guy and from now that a person like Trump is running, it says there's no point. So your other, 1 or 2% candidates, your Nikki Haley's, your Mike Pompeo's, now's your time to say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't run for president. Maybe it's time for me to start running for vice president instead.
Do you think DeSantis has a good chance against Trump, Nate?
Yeah, I think he does. Oh, he asked you, but
I think he'll do a solid job, but I don't think he's going to win. Remember, Trump won in 2016 with about 45% of the vote. You don't need a majority in the Republican Party's primary apparatus.
It would be great if they both ran at the same time, and then they would split the vote, and then neither one would win.
And then Liz Cheney would emerge, huh? But I was just saying, if they both cancel each other out, maybe someone like a Liz Cheney could emerge. I
would vote. No way. I don't know. I mean, she would certainly be a breath of fresh air.
The other big question is, if two different election deniers run against each other and they both lose, what happens then?
So,
conundrum.
One thing we haven't discussed also is the influence of billionaires, right, in this election. When you're looking at this midterm cycle alone, I look at billionaires like George Soros allocated $128.5 million for the Democratic Party, but you also have a lot of you have a lot of Republican donors. You've got Richard Yulhin, 80.7 million. You have Kenneth Griffin, 68.6 million for the Republicans. Jeff
Rick
Yass,
Caruso, 100 million.
right? Jeff Yass, 47 million.
Let's not
And this is
forget
also
Elon Musk donated Twitter to the entire.
and we please forget Elon Musk. But this is the result of Citizens United. Of course, Citizens United overturned decades of regulations that pertain to how much money could be allocated for political campaigns. Now, political contributions are equated to free speech, and so we're going to see more of this. As
Go ahead.
Ishmael, go ahead.
We got social media. We got people. But it's just that statement just caught me a little bit off guard as something that was a very grand one.
Let me refine that a little bit. Corporate donations are regarded as
sorry,
free speech.
I should have qualified that. Corporate.
No,
corporations donations are equated to free speech. Thank you, Nick.
If I can take one point of solace, though, from money, is that big money can be defeated. 2 years ago, we watched Mike Bloomberg spend $500 million of his own money to run for president, and all he got out of it was the American Samoa caucus. So, big money can be defeated if you work hard enough.
Well, I think it's not 100% fair, because what I remember, and I could be wrong, is that Bloomberg decided not to run because he was afraid he was going to take too many votes from the Democrats, and that would just sort of, produce by default a Republican win. And so he decided, for the good, that's how it was presented, for the good of the nation, he wasn't going to run.
Also, Biden was going, if you remember,
until he only got American Samoa and in the primaries, and then he dropped out.
And if you remember that the timing in which Bloomberg dropped into the race was November, I believe, of 2019, late in the game. And the reason why he jumped in so late was because people were saying, Biden doesn't look too hot in terms of polling. I was supporting Biden, and a lot of people were laughing, saying, you ought to pick a different racehorse. And I said, well, just hold on until South Carolina. But at the time, it looked like Bloomberg was the safest bet for those who are in Wall Street, who wanted a centrist.
Mike, you're traumatizing me, Mike. You're traumatizing me.
No, but what Mike's saying is true. That there was, I think a few weeks where Mike Bloomberg had a legitimate route to that nomination because Biden did not look good at all. He wasn't strong coming out of Iowa, and New Hampshire. South Carolina, when he went into that race, who
was beating him in those states? Who was Bernie Sanders? That's why I'm traumatized.
No, he did not. He did not win those states.
Bernie won Iowa, Nevada, and New Hampshire, Jerry. Bernie won Nevada by like 40 points.
Why didn't the congressional
Bernie Sanders did not win Iowa. Pete won Iowa. Just to be very clear about that, Pete won Iowa. You can. If we're going to talk about facts-ish, let's talk about the facts. Right, because Pete won Iowa. The Bernie did well in New Hampshire, but as usual, when it came down to the South and to Black voters, he was rejected again.
Why? That's what I really want to know, because I feel like Bernie had the best
there's a many reasons why. We can have the discussion.
It was familiarity with Black voters. Biden had that as Obama's vice president for 8 years, but we're not here to relitigate
Who had the best
2020.
policies? Why wasn't our Congressional Black Caucus pushing the best policies for the Black community?
Because remember that the priority in 2020 was who could beat Trump, not who was going to have the best policy.
And the members of the caucus didn't believe Bernie was articulating the best policies because they didn't believe Bernie's policies would ever come to fruition. So that's why Bernie is not really a warm and fuzzy guy. Okay. And he didn't connect with the members of the caucus. He didn't connect with Black voters generally. He connected with some, but not generally, not a big enough clip. And people didn't think that he was going to be able to do what he said he was going to do. That's okay. I mean, every politician has to offer themselves and their policies, and people accept them or reject them. Bernie's were rejected. Now, as you said earlier, Ish, just because he was saying that stuff doesn't mean he was all wrong. Just because he was saying that stuff and was rejected doesn't mean it was wrong. It just means people didn't want to accept it, and that happens.
Yeah.
He was also very, very far to the left.
I would like to just mention something, because we mentioned Citizens United, and particularly knowing some of the words that this court used in the Dobbs decision about egregiously wrong decisions, Citizens United didn't just overturn a law that had been in place for 20 some years. It overturned over 200 years of precedent, because in the Dartmouth case, back in John Marshall's time on the Supreme Court, they said corporations are not people.
Not people.
Citizens United said they were. 200 years
Sound like
later, John Marshall got it wrong.
Well, how come the people aren't making the elected representative get it right?
Well, I mean, you can't get it right until you amend the Constitution, according to Citizens United. Citizens United says the Constitution prohibits this because corporations are people and therefore need to be treated as people under the Constitution. You have to change the Constitution that says
no, you don't.
Yeah, you do.
For Supreme Court opinions on constitutional on constitutional matters, you need a constitutional
I'm gonna tell
amendment.
you how you could do it. I'm gonna tell you how you could do it. Only elect presidents who are going to appoint justices, or make your Congress pack the court to change. The people have the power to do whatever they want to do, and through multiple means in this country.
Very naive.
Well, that's already problematic right there. You know,
Naive that the people got control, like educate.
No. That
I would love to see court expansion too, but with court expansion, we need a strong Democratic majority in both houses of Congress that's going to be willing to do that.
Franklin
I don't
Roosevelt
think we got
had
a
a huge
democracy
majority
there.
in the Congress and couldn't pack the court. Okay.
That's right.
I'm talking about. I'm
Well,
talking
to be
about
fair to
where
FDR,
does
he also
the
got
buck
the
lie?
court to
The
do what
buck-
he
I'm talking
wanted.
about, where does the buck lie? The buck lies
After a bunch of them died.
with the electorate, with the citizenry of the United States of America. So I just don't want to ever put too much blame on one elected official when they are elected by the people. And if the people could, engage with their civic responsibility at a higher level, I think a lot of these issues would get solved in a more complete way.
I wanted to say that this is why our elections are so important, why democracy, I feel like, is in danger, is because when you have the secretaries of state that are running unopposed, that are election deniers, I really don't think it matters who the dictator is going to be, because the precedent is there. Donald Trump has already started the election denying, and anyone who comes after him will know, hey, if I follow this strategy, I can sow discord within this country. And I think that, with that happening, it doesn't matter who the dictator is. It doesn't matter, because you see in Brazil, the strategy is being used again. And if this is constantly being brought up of our elections aren't fair, our elections are being rigged, there's going to be people who aren't smart enough to see through that. If they keep hearing that our elections aren't fair anymore, they're not going to think that any elections in the future are going to be fair.
And they won't vote.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like this is
we have
the structure
voter turnout.
And I don't think it's apocalyptic. I think it's the reality.
So we don't have huge voter turnout. We have
I thought that's what Mike said.
No, we have comparatively huge voter turnout. The voter turnout in this country is still abysmal. Absolutely abysmal. I think it's under 60%.
Yep, as a general proposition.
No, I would agree.
So to Ish's point, if the citizens want to take control of their government, more than 60% of them have to vote.
That's a fact.
Unfortunately, Dr. Cook, I don't think most citizens want to be bothered. They just want somebody else to tell them what to do. Why
not? But if they know the gravity of what they're being asked to do, why wouldn't they want to be bothered?
You and I would like to be bothered, but most people, I think, they just want things to just go on. And
no, I think it's more to what Dr. Cook just said. Why would anyone want that? No, I think you're using the word "want" when it means that they're not aware of they're not abreast of the full situation. They don't comprehend what's going on.
I disagree with you. I think that most people just want to live their life and have everybody leave them alone, and they don't want to get involved. And we
all live in a world. It's a social contract. What do you mean? Like we have, unless you want, you're not
people break contracts all the time. People break contracts.
No, but I'm saying, but
there's also most people are lazy when it comes to that.
But you don't want people to take the active role in their own governance.
No. She's not arguing that she doesn't want them to. She's saying that's where they are. Now, the question is, how do you get them from that place to where they need to be? But it's not that that's a good thing. It's not
a good thing. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing.
Part of the issue is also that it is incredibly difficult to vote in this country. There are in many other countries in the the Western world, the democratized world, it is illegal not to vote. And therefore, everyone not only is required to vote, but they are inherently given the opportunity to vote that works into their day. In this country, it is on a Tuesday during mostly work hours. A lot of people have to choose between, do they get their paycheck for the day, do they keep their job, or do they go to vote? I'm lucky enough to have an employer who was very happy to hear that I was probably coming in late this morning so I could go vote. Not everyone has that situation, and it's frankly ridiculous. Even with the increase in mail-in ballots that happened recently, my father, for no reason whatsoever, was denied a mail-in ballot. That wasn't supposed to happen in Pennsylvania this time around, but it did. He did not get the chance to vote by mail-in. He had to vote in person. But it's ridiculous, especially when you talk about a civic duty and that it is something that is necessary for this country to function. Not only is it made difficult to vote for people who are put on the rolls, it's made incredibly difficult for people to be on the rolls to begin with.
And I think
so
also,
in New York, you're required to have 4 hours off during the day to go vote, but I don't know that they're required to be paid. And then you have to explain to your employee, yeah, we're all going to vote. And, so there's a lot of, pushback that you're going to get from your coworkers. Oh, you're going to be gone for 2.5 hours, like what's going on? So it's not an easy thing to exercise, even though you have the right to do it.
I think also we have the problem.
It's worth it. It's worth it though. And just one caveat: we need educated voters, not just voters. And we need to have education. We need institutions that are not subjected to baseless ideology. But what are you going to
we also have
educated voters? You have to have people who are willing to keep an open mind about other people and to let information in, and not just to become educated about the things that they're interested in. Yeah, you're saying
I wouldn't consider that education,
but that's not. Unfortunately, my experience of the world is that most people only learn about the things that they think they're going to agree with, and they don't. There's a lot of people out there that don't let other ideas in, and they're not really.
We're making a strong argument for dictatorship right now.
I know.
I think we have two problems with voting
I actually wrote an apocalyptic book. I wrote a dystopian fiction, and I hope it never comes to pass.
We have the issue, number one, where we have several people, both active politicians and candidates, who see long lines on election day as an inherently good thing. But that's a problem, because when you have to stand in line for hours to vote, that means that, like Zach said, that's an hour where you're not getting paid. That's an hour where you have to find childcare for your children if you're not able to have them in line with you. It's an hour effectively where it's harder to vote. We also have the issue of
we have to stand in line.
We also have the issue of
gerrymandering,
where you've got districts that are drawn so artistically and creatively that that your vote doesn't matter anyway, because it's so skewed one way or the other. So if you're a voter on either side, you say, hey, what's the big deal? This person's gonna win anyway. Why does my voice and my vote don't matter? When you're a Democratic voter in the Upper West Side, you don't feel that same pressure to vote that a voter in Cobb County, Georgia does, because that your guy's going to win no matter what.
Yeah. House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy and his team have been working on a victory speech for the last couple of weeks. And they're remaining extremely confident that they will take back the House. I recall a speech in which McCarthy said, I want you to see Nancy Pelosi hand me that gavel. While he's prepared the remarks, he's expected to riff a bit as well. His team expects he may take the stage at 11 p.m. tonight. If things go as they expect. It's also expected that Republican National Committee Chair Ronna McDaniel and potentially former House Speaker Newt Gingrich could speak as well tonight. And that aside, I think the Democrats had a great record to run on. They bought a lot of popular bills into fruition, and this was during a summer when, remember, we were talking about Manchin and Sinema stalling Biden's agenda just a few months ago. All of a sudden, Chuck Schumer gets Manchin in a room, and they come out with the Inflation Reduction Act, right? The Republicans thought they had Manchin at a lockbox. They thought he was going to kind of be their, fire in the hole. And now they said they were going to try to stall agreements as it pertains to the PACT Act. That backfired on them when you had people like Jon Stewart blasting them, putting them on full blast about the hypocrisy of not supporting the veterans who had exposure to burn pits. And so they had a lot of things going for them heading into this fall. My only criticism for the Democrats would be that a lot of the things that they did at the end I'm worried if it's going to be too little too late. The focus on Biden saying, if we get in, we're going to make codifying Roe versus Wade a top priority. I think he should have done that June 25th, the day after the Dobbs decision. Obama coming in, who's probably the only Democrat right now polling above water, coming in and, really just, doing great things in terms of getting the vote out for Georgians and Pennsylvania. I think he should have been on the trail earlier. He should have been out at least by late September or early August. I mean, he should have been out more, I think. That's just my take. I think no matter what happens, we're not going to see a wave. I think that the record turnout coupled with the polarization is going to result in someone taking the majority, but I don't think it's going to be a huge wave like a lot of pundits are saying. This is not a normal midterm. You can even compare this midterm to 2018, right? Because we didn't have an insurrection in 2017, right? Hillary Clinton conceded the next day. But we're not seeing that here. And then you couple that with the news that Trump is making an announcement. Trump might as well announce today. I mean, he already announced he's running for president. It's just a formality, to have the specific day. And there are a lot of Republicans afraid that he might rain on their parade as it pertains to their plans for this election. But I think a lot of people may have been motivated by his potential announcement to say, listen, I see where this is going, and I want to make sure that the Democrats are in power to ensure that Trump's agenda is not enacted and that the ground is not laid for him to come back and make a triumphant return.
Could be. Donald Trump, fundamentally elected Reverend Warnock in Georgia because of his antics there. And he may do damage to his so-called Republican colleagues with his current antics. Hard to know, but we'll see later tonight and in the coming days.
What concerns me the most, I think, is that if that should Democrats, lose their majorities of in Congress, the reaction we see from Democratic members of the Democratic caucus on all wings of the faction saying we lost because we focused too much on social issues, too much on abortion, too much on trans rights, too much on Black rights, as opposed to, pointing the finger at the very real problems that it takes courage to address. And when I say all sides, I mean everyone from your Abigail Spanbergers and Joe Manchins, even to your Bernie Sanderses. That's what concerns me the most.
And so, sorry, Nate, just to be clear, you said you hope they don't do that?
I hope they don't do that, but they probably will.
Okay.
That's what upsets me.
Yeah, I would agree.
But that's the huge challenge of the so-called Democratic Party, is that the diversity of thought, the diversity of interest, the diversity of points of view within that party is much less homogenous than the Republican Party. And so you get these people saying these things because that's what they believe philosophically, personally. Then the media creates this echo chamber of Democrats in disarray, and it feeds itself, and it looks like Democrats are in disarray. But just as you said with the president's legislation, it was media talk. Oh, they'll never get it together. They're going to fall on their face. Joe Manchin is a Republican in Democrats' clothing. And that never really was the case in terms of the reality of it. But that's what everybody was talking about. And so I think it's going to be difficult, but I think that's part of both the strength and weakness of the so-called Democratic Party, is that this diversity of thought. It's a challenge, and back from my day, you talked about it, but it's the same party that could have Ted Kennedy and Richard Shelby as members of the party. That's just insane, but that's what it was.
Yeah.
And Mike, if I could take just 1 second early, just to give myself a clarification at the end of the episode. When I said Trump versus deep state, I wasn't basing that based on some Fox News Tucker Carlson reporting. I based that on things I read by Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald, stewards of traditional investigative journalism, exposing the right and the left. So, and they made cogent arguments, but like many things, or like a few things that happen in pop culture that MSNBC or others of their kind may try to paint as straight conspiracy theory, like the origins of the COVID pandemic, like Hunter Biden's laptop. Like, we need to start calling out these Democratic players who try to alter reality, and then when they're shown to be 180 degrees incorrect, it's just like, okay. So I don't know. I just wanted to put that in there. Sorry, not to muddy the water.
Really quickly, I wanted to say, I think that Democrats really should focus on a lot more areas in the country. A few of us went to school in Alabama, Oakwood University, and I had the pleasure of running a voter registration drive and a lot of voting drives there. And I found that there's a lot of areas that Democrats just don't tap into. Like we mentioned earlier, Georgia, who has a voter suppression problem. That's very true within the South. And, Huntsville, Montgomery, Birmingham, those are all Democratic heavy areas. So I think that if this party can really focus on driving out the extra 40% that are just asleep, that don't really seem to care, to not focus on polarizing things as much and just talking about the freedoms that we deserve and the things that the dreams that our founding fathers had for us, then we could really pull it out and make this country better. So on that note,
so I do think a takeaway from tonight will be the DNC is going to start kicking itself tomorrow morning, I think, because they really should have poured some more money into Tim Ryan's race. I think they should have invested more in Val Demings. I had Dr. Will Boyd on the program, and he was talking about, everyone's talking about all these races. What about me in Alabama? At least help me make this a competitive race. That coupled with the fact that I think Fetterman should have tried his best to move focus away from his sickness and more on Dr. Oz's lack of a legislative agenda and where he is on abortion. I think there was too much attention on whether or not he's going to debate, whether or not he's, fit, whether or not he's okay. He should have worked harder to change that narrative. But that being said, are there any other closing thoughts before we?
I'll just say what you just said. A long time ago, Andrew Young said this about the Democratic Party apparatus, the superstructure. That it's the province of a very small group of people who think they know everything about everything. He used other words I won't use right here, but they run it, and they make the decision that Ms. Toombs talked about just throwing away certain segments of the population. They're not worth our time to try to get them to vote because we think we can get it done by getting vote out in Chicago or New York or Los Angeles, and Tim Ryan is a perfect example. They should have invested in Tim Ryan, but they didn't spend any money on Tim Ryan. They should have invested in Val Demings. Now, I don't think Val would have really won, but I think it would have been a different race, a closer race, and they could have done more damage, I think, ultimately to Rubio. But the smart Alex, the guys who know everything, and these are mostly guys, they think they know everything, and they decide who the winners and losers are internally to the Democratic Party. And I think that serves as a larger detriment to the Democrat Party writ large, because these guys have these Eastern coastal views of the world, and they don't see the country that's not there and in those places, and that's a problem. And that's why you have to go through this thing every 2 or 4 years, analyzing what we did wrong and never really solving the problem. They don't spend any money in the Black community or the Hispanic community or the Asian community until 6 months before the election. Where is the investment on an ongoing basis? Yeah. Where's the investment that will produce the results that you want, as opposed to saying, I got a bunch of big-headed consultants, I'm going to spend money on them, and they're going to do radio buys, and that'll convince Black people to vote for you.
Yeah, but Mike. Yeah,
also,
I agree with Professor Cook. Professor Cook, I agree with you, but what happens after every single election? It happened after 18, 20, 94, 96. After the election, we have to find somebody to blame. We're going to blame the DNC. We're going to blame the money over here. We're going to blame somebody for not going to a county or going to the state. But at the end of the day, Mike, you talked about the persons running in Alabama. It could just be the people of Alabama are more, Republican, right? And those people are more passionate in that state who are Republican. They come out and vote. The people in Ohio might like J.D. Vance more, right? Now, I think when we get into those little critiques, I think there's merit there when the elections are very, very close, when it's like, 49 to 51%. But in some of these races where there is a 10-point difference, we can go into Monday morning quarterbacking and we put a blame here and this, but at the end of the day, it's up to the voters. I mean, that's a great thing about democracy. It's up to us. And I think people will speak, and people are going to speak tonight, and we'll see what America looks like tomorrow morning.
I think one other thing, just to sort of piggyback off of both of those, if I may, real quickly, is the Democratic Party also has a real problem with over trusting certain demographics to just be loyal. We particularly saw that
Say
in
their name.
2016.
I'm just kidding.
We particularly saw that in.
I'm just teasing. I'm sorry.
The biggest example I was thinking of, although yes, the biggest example I was thinking of was the Blue Belt, the Rust Belt, was lost in 2016. As I recall, Hillary Clinton didn't bother campaigning in 3 Rust Belt states because she assumed, and the Democratic Party assumed that those states were going to stay blue, and they didn't because, frankly, a lot of people have been taken for granted as solid voters, and Democratic Party is really still hasn't learned its lesson about that.
And I would argue that it's not just that being taken advantage. They would see it that they're being aggressed upon, that they're being dictated to things, guys. This truth that is really ideology.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I wanted to.
And I'm not going to say their name.
It's a very bad move for the Democratic Party to say that it's the party of the working class, and then also when working class people say, "Oh well, I'm losing my job in the mine," well, we're not going to go do coal anymore, so get a job in solar. If you don't actually address
or learn how to code, or something.
Yes. All sorts of whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's just a dismissiveness that happens in the Democratic Party a lot that is very troubling.
Yeah, I'll always push back, Zach, on that issue in 2016 about Hillary not coming within the last week or two to Wisconsin, to the Rust Belt. The thing is, in 2016, look, that election was 24/7 coverage for like over a year. It was, you couldn't escape it. And if you didn't vote for Hillary, if you were in Wisconsin, you weren't going to come and vote for her because she came to your city a week before the election, because people who's going to come those rallies is going to be Hillary supporters. So it's like after that year that we were just engulfed with Trump and Hillary every single day. If you're saying after that full year, I'm not going to vote for her because she didn't come to my state in the last week, I don't know what she stands for. I think it's kind of
I'm not saying that if she had come, everyone would have suddenly voted for her or for the Democrats. But the fact that she didn't bother showing up helped reinforce feelings in people that she and the Democratic Party didn't really care.
And it depressed turnout as well.
That wrong.
It depressed turnout too. If 2 more voters per precinct had shown up in Wisconsin, she would have won that state. But I think, first off, I do have to push back against your working class point, Zach, because when we say working class, who do we really mean? Democrats tend to clean up among voters making less than $100,000. So we're talking about a very specific subset of the working class that looks a certain way. And, these guys are not voting for Trump based on Trump's view of, international security and the Iran nuclear deal. It's other reasons. But I think the big lesson that has to be taken for Democrats is never to take a voter for granted. Republicans are campaigning and evangelizing everywhere. There's a lot of talk about Gen Z. Well, spreading your news. That's what evangelizing is.
Okay.
But, there's a lot of talk about Gen Z being a very blue demographic. Gen Z, the social media Gen Z uses the most is TikTok. And the biggest accounts on TikTok are predominantly conservative influencers. There's not that big, because Democrats have not bothered to build a presence there.
Or one message resonates more than the other, and we have to ask
it's not just about message discipline; it's also about presence. You have to be willing to throw things at the wall before you see what sticks.
Everything isn't like people actually want to be able to feel like what they're being told is reality. It does, correspond with their day-to-day life. And the Democrats who also have asked people to not
something
do that
until you find something that resonates. And Democrats tend to spend a lot of time trying to find the nice, perfect thing that's going to resonate with the left and the centrists and the suburban moms and the Reagan Republicans and all of them. And
you said DeSantis did that?
I said Democrats in general have a tendency to kind of try to find these focus group things. But what
Yeah.
should have been very clear for a while is that Democrats need to be able to invest in their core constituencies and not be able to take them for granted. Whether it's the Hispanic vote in South Florida and along the border, whether it's the Asian vote in the Northeast and out West, and whether it's Black voters who have been neglected by the party for a very long
What if the
time.
Democratic Party and these people have ideological differences? That's what I'm getting at. Do you think that happens or no?
That does happen. Electorates shift,
Okay.
priorities shift, and landscapes shift. But if the Democratic Party wants to maintain its viability, then it has to be able to keep those voters in the fold.
Or they have to change. I just feel like I'm not hearing that from your end. As it's almost like they have to do something to. I don't know. I may be hearing. I may be putting things onto it.
This was a really
when you're a leader, you have to you can be, there's all kinds of leaders, but if you're going to present an agenda to people and try to persuade them that agenda is good for them, then you have to convince people that it is good for them. Now, the people may reject your agenda. They may say, you know what, that's really not what I want out of my life, for good, bad, or indifferent reasons. They may choose to make that decision. And then you as a leader have got to figure out, do I want to continue to push my vision of the world, or am I going to embrace the people I want to lead's vision and try to help them actualize their vision? And it's an iterative process. There's a give and take in this. And you can't just dictate. We used that word a couple times before. You can't just dictate to people and expect them to follow you. You've got to give them a reason to win their hearts and minds. You got to figure out a way to do that. And that may mean, well, I think I'm pushing a tax policy of a 37% tax rate, and the people don't want that. Maybe I got to move it to 25. I don't know, but you got to sort of have that conversation with people. But you can't do that if you're not there with them, talking with them, not talking to them.
And I think, it's amazing how DeSantis's Latino support grew in spite of the stunt he pulled by shipping all of those Venezuelan migrants up to the Northeast, up to Martha's Vineyard. I think, to kind of tie up what everyone was saying, that's just evidence further of kind of that disconnect that the Democrats may have with that demographic, right? But the disconnect that I have with that poll is how are they able? What specifically are they able to point to rationalize that support? But there's so many different parts at play, so many different moving items in this election, and I'm so glad to have had each of your minds represented on a night like this. This is one of the most spirited discussions I think we've had on this platform. But I think at the end of the day, we're able to walk away and learn from each other, and I think that's one thing I'm most proud of. So I'm thankful to you, Zach, Professor Cook, Tia, Nate, Jerry, Dr. Blaine, Ishmael. Thank you each for what you brought to episode 82 of the Political Mike podcast. We went over by a lot, but I just want to thank you. This was a special election episode, a special edition. Tune in. I hope you all voted. As I encourage you every week, refrain from sketchy sources of news and challenge the sources of news that you do plug into. With that being said, let me conclude episode 82 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you all so much.